were on the call last week, I suggested that you might want to use a decision tree backwards, knowing that we've got homework on analysis of variance. To look at an analysis of variance require that your independent variables be categorical and your dependent variable be quantitative, also known as interval level data or continuous data. And so looking backwards at the decision tree, you could say, okay, so which of my variables is what? So, and last time's homework, the dependent variables had to do with feelings and attitudes towards the dad, and they were continuous variables. They were quantitative data. So clearly that's a dependent variable. And also looking backward at last time's homework, the independent variables were, in one case, race ethnicity, and in another case in terms of family structure. And in both cases, those were categorical variables. You know, we had, I can't remember now, 4 or 5 racial groups, and we had 4, I think it was, family structure groups. So clearly the independent variables are discrete, or they're categorical, and the dependent variables are quantitative, and so fits in very well with the analysis of variance. So then the next step is to write hypotheses, and I've asked you to please write, and this has been true in all the feedback you've gotten. If you haven't done this, please ask directional hypotheses. Then essentially are also known as alternate hypotheses, which is your prediction. How do you think it's going to come out? I mean, obviously the null hypothesis is there'll be no difference between the white people in the sample and the people from other ethnic groups. But what's your guess? You know, how do you think it's really going to turn out? What's your bet about which group is going to score significantly higher on attitudes towards the father or feelings towards the father than which other groups? So that's why you would do the hypotheses, and that's why you would do the directional hypotheses. All right, so the next step is, you know, the beauty here with this homework is you always know what the stats that you're doing is, because it's a chapter on ANOVA in this particular case, or in the case of the homework that's due on Monday, it's a chapter on ANCOVA, which we will also talk about. But then the wrinkle with ANOVA is, do you have a one-way ANOVA, or do you have a two-way or a three-way? And one-way, two-way, three-way has to do with how many independent variables you have. In the case of the two-way ANOVAs that we've done, they've been factorial, meaning you've got 2 independent variables where the groups, so for example, if you have racial groups, you have whites, you've got Hispanics, you've got African Americans, you've got Asian Americans, and I can't remember what other groups. And then with the other independent variable, you have family structure, you have living with biological parents, you've got with bio mom and stepdad, you've got, I can't remember what. But within the white group, you've got some people that are in each of the different family structures. Within the African American groups, you have some people that are within the various family structures. So that's called factorial, because the 2 variables are factored in so that there are groups in each of the different categories of the first variable and of the second variable. So that's in the last assignment. You were asked first to do one-way ANOVAs because you took a single independent variable, race ethnicity in one case and family structure in the next case, and then you were to do ANOVAs separately for feelings towards dad, separate from attitudes towards dad. So you basically had 2 one-way ANOVAs, one with race, one with family structure, and you did that twice. You did it once with the dependent variable being attitudes towards dad, and once with feelings towards dad. And then you were asked to do a factorial ANOVA, which is where you had 2 independent variables. And when you have independent variables in the way that we did there, we have what's called a main effect. A main effect means the effect that's just due to that independent variable. And in the case of last time's homework, we had, in the factorial ANOVA in particular, we had 2 main effects. We had a main effect due to race, ethnicity, and we had a main effect due to family structure. And then we had an interaction. And an interaction is the combined effect of those two independent variables. It's kind of like, in a chemistry experiment, if you take atoms of hydrogen and atoms of oxygen and you put them together, they interact, they change. You no longer have two separate atoms of hydrogen and one of oxygen. You've got something that's combined that's different. So the interaction is kind of like that combined effect, because sometimes it's too simple to say that it's this variable that related to your dependent variable in a particular way, or it's that variable. Sometimes it's, well, it depends. It's combined. So I think it's really important to know what a main effect is and what an interaction is. Main effect is the main effect due to a single independent variable, and if you've got more than one in your analysis, each one at a time. And by the way, we've been doing the factorial analyses with two independent variables. We could do it with three. We could add age in there, let's say, or we could add gender in there, and we could add both of them, and we'd have a four-way ANOVA. And then the problem is trying to interpret what that means gets very complicated. But in theory, one could do that. So we've only done one way and then these two-way ANOVAs, but we could do analyses involving analysis of variance that have more than two independent variables. So then the next question I came up with, because some of you particularly had problems with this, well, why would I do these post hoc analyses? And in all the homework, we've suggested that you pick Bonferroni. There are a whole bunch of different kinds of stats that you could use. There's a Scheffé, there's a Tukey, there's a Duncan, there's a Newman-Cool's. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ones, and I don't want to bore you, overwhelm you with that. That's really why we say just pick Bonferroni. But in each case, what they all do is they say, okay, when we have a main effect that's significant, if we have two groups, if we have males and females, and we do the analysis of variance, and the F turns out to be significant, that means that the two groups are different from each other. And since there are only two groups, there's men and there's women, and there's a significant F, then that means that the men and the women operate differently in terms of whatever our dependent variable is. And then if we look at the means, and if the men have a mean of 45.75 and the women have a mean of 35.75 and the F is significant, then we can say that the men score significantly higher than the women. And that's really cool if we only have two groups. But what happens if we have three groups? Let's say we have the racial variable. So we've got whites, and we've got Hispanics, and we've got African Americans, and we've got Asian Americans, and we get a significant effect due to race. All that's telling us is that at least two groups are different from each other. So it could be that the whites are different from the African Americans. It could be that the whites are different from the Asian Americans. It could be that the Asian Americans are different from the Hispanic Americans. But just looking at the means, we can't tell. That's when we do the post hocs, because we need to find out. The F value just means there's significance somewhere in there between two or more of those groups. It doesn't tell us which ones. And that's what we have to do, those post hocs. And then we can look at, if you look at, it'll tell you the significance level. When there's a significant post hoc, then that tells you that, this particular racial group is significantly different from that racial group. Not on the main effect. The main effect was the overall F, but on that contrast, because what you're doing with post hoc, you're looking at contrast. So another piece of languaging. The contrast is when you do a post hoc after you have a significant main effect or a significant interaction, and you're wanting to know which group is significantly different from which other groups. So you can't really begin to do your interpretation of what the ANOVA means until you've done the post hoc if you have more than two groups. If you only have two groups, then it's easy. Just look at the means and you determine that. By the way, stop me if you have questions, because I'm going off on my lecture routine, and I don't want to just lecture at you and have you go to sleep if this is not meaningful to you. But I'm trying to give you a sense of how all these different pieces go together. Yeah. Somebody just unmuted themselves. So you have a question? Marilyn?
No, you're not lecturing. It's actually very, very helpful. And
okay.
Thank you for doubling your teaching time.
Okay, my pleasure. Because, the way I figure it is if I spend more time doing this, maybe I'll spend less time writing your little comments on your papers because, not that it makes a difference and not that you should care, but I'm spending a whole lot of time on your homeworks. And so, and I feel kind of like if you guys are working hard, I got to work hard too. But I sure would prefer doing other kind of working hard than grading papers, which is not my favorite thing to do. But okay, it's important. So, Michelle, I think you also unmuted yourself. Okay.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, yes. No, I was just agreeing with Marilyn. I really
Okay.
appreciate the explanation and the lecture. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. Because I really think that unless you understand the rationale for what you're doing, that these exercises have got to be meaningless. And I can understand if you don't understand what you're doing, why some of you would be really frustrated about spending all this time doing this what might feel like crap to you and not really understanding how it's going to be useful or how it is useful. And, when you get this stuff um, handled and understood, you'll be able to take a research article and not skip the section that describes the results or, that talks about the stats that were done. And it will be much, much easier for you to do this homework. I'm trying to think of what else I need to explain in terms of analysis of variance. Again, I have a little cheat sheet, and I have some comments to myself, but I can't read my handwriting. So I think I will ask you for any questions you have, because I basically have answered the two questions that I had, which is why would we spend all this time doing Explore and doing all those analyses, and why do we do post hocs? But and why do we formulate hypotheses? Because they really are the thing that guide us in what we're doing. So what kinds of questions do you have about the logic behind the process that we've used? Because it's going to continue. As we do other statistical analysis, we're still going to ask you to go through Explore. We're still going to ask you to have hypotheses. And where appropriate, we will need for you to do additional kinds of analyses on the data. So time for questions, folks.
Michelle?
Yes.
How about on regression slopes? I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and maybe also what's behind that.
Let's not do that right now, okay?
Okay.
Let's save that for when we get into correlation and regression. Because now I want you guys to get the concept of analysis of variance. Because I'm sorry, Lance, was that you, Lance, by the way?
Yeah, it is. I was just, because it's on our assignment, but you're wanting...
It's on the upcoming assignment?
Yes.
Okay, let me take a peek at it. Okay. All right.
It's really just under the testing assumptions of
I see that. Yeah. Let's if we could, let's come back to that. I just want to make sure that that the process so far is making a little more sense, that you're understanding what main effects, what interactions are, why you do post hocs, why would you do all these Explore things to explore the missing values and the outliers and the distribution of our data. So anybody have any questions about that? Okay. Because as I said, we're going to continue to ask you to do each of those steps. Okay, so let's turn to, if that's okay with you all, now I can spend more time on this if you want, but I'd like to turn to the assignment number 5 that's due on Monday, just to be able to address that particular process. I'm not hearing any complaints about that, so hearing no complaints, we'll move forward with that. And I have got on my screen, oh dear, let me close all these windows that are open so you can get to, whoa, what happened here? Right. So assignment number 5 introduces analysis of covariant, and not covariate, covariant And what analysis of covariant is an analysis that is based on analysis of variance, but allows you to statistically remove the effect of a variable that seems to be correlated with your dependent variable. So in the homework that you have, there are two data sets, and I have got, I can't remember which one now, either career A or career E. Just like the assignment a couple times ago, you're going to do the first part of the assignment focusing on career A, which basically, again, is going to ask you to look at the distribution of scores and what kinds of missing data and outliers we have, et cetera, and then after you've gone through your exploration of the data and have your commentary about why you think what you think about either the shapes of the distributions or the missing data or the outliers, then it's actually going to do some transformations for you. And the data that's in career E is the one that you're supposed to do the rest of the assignment with because the data have been transformed. So as I've shown some of you before, you can take this whole big data set, whoops, I hope I didn't, and you can simply create a subset of the data which focus only on the variables that you want to look at. Everybody know how to do that? Because it's sure a lot easier when all you've got on your screen are the 4 variables that you need for the analysis. Okay, somebody want me to kind of review that? Okay, then I won't review that. Thank you, Marilyn. So assuming you have the smaller data set, which we have here, this is for career A, and then you would go through the steps that we've done before to explore the data and also to develop your research questions and hypotheses for main effects and interaction. Now, let me talk briefly about analysis of covariance and what we have here. So here you've got 2 variables, sex and age, and those are what kinds of variables? Somebody? You can write them. Independent variable, that's right, Marilyn. And then you've got respondent's income, because we're asking the question about the effect of gender on the one hand and age on the respondent's income, and that is the dependent variable. Notice that your dependent variable is a continuous variable or an interval variable or a quantitative variable, and that your independent variables are categorical. So sex, I'm assuming we have male and female, and then age, because it's not just the actual age like 19 or 27, which would be what? A continuous variable, right? It'd be a quantitative variable. But it's a category that somehow the data have been set up, and we can look at that for the age category variable. You can see that what the researchers have done here is they've created 4 categories: 18 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and 50 plus. So this too is categorical variable. And you know, when you don't know, like I just made an assumption here that income was a continuous variable. Oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. I didn't show you my screen. Thank you, Michelle. So I'm sorry. Here's my screen with the 4 variables that I simplified my data set for. And I was trying to show you that, you know, when you look at age, you can see that it's a categorical variable. Hopefully you can now see my screen. And that the researchers have basically created 4 categories. So indeed it's categorical. It's not a quantitative variable. And now if we do this for income, which I assumed was a categorical, oh dear. Well, interesting. They've created that as a categorical variable. And I'm not sure why they've done that. But okay, so for right now, let's leave that alone, and I'll come back to that. the other variable that's in here, if you look at the problem that's being posed, is controlling for hours worked per week. So whenever you have a situation in which you're looking at the difference between groups on some dependent variable, but you want to control for some other variable, you have analysis of covariance. And that new variable, hours worked, is a covariate. And what analysis of covariance does is it statistically removes, or I like to use the word neutralizes the hours worked variable, meaning that assuming that hours worked is equivalent for everybody, is there a relationship between sex and age on income? Now, obviously, if people work more hours, they're going to make more money. So if we control for the hours worked, then we're equalizing, sorry about that, we're equalizing the effect of that particular variable. So analysis of covariance is a procedure, and by the way, if you look on page 115, we've got this checklist for conducting ANCOVA that will literally walk you through for what you put into the analysis, because you're still going to be using univariate and NOVA like we've done for the last two. We're going to do something a little bit different, and it shows you how to actually enter that that variable as a covariate and how to run the ANCOVA. But I wanted you to understand conceptually what it was that we were doing that's different from what we've done before. Okay, questions? Well, it is kind of a it's not covariant, it's covariate. It is a kind of independent variable, if you will, because the reason we're going to put it in as a covariate is either logically, when you think about it, you go, oh, well, gee, if you work more hours, you're going to make more money. Or you have statistically shown that there is a strong correlation between hours worked and income. Either one of those. It is kind of, it's like a competing or an alternate explanation for why people's income is the way it is. And so we have to remove it statistically. If we want to know, does gender make a difference? Does age make a difference on how much money people make? And if we don't control for the hours worked, we might reach, because maybe older people work fewer hours, or maybe women work fewer hours. So if the issue is they're working fewer hours so they're making less money, then we really have to statistically get rid of the effect of the hours worked. So that would be why we would do a covariate. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that, Marilyn. Fewer hours worked. I know. You are poorer, I'm sure. And then you have this debt that you take on. But anyway, political issues aside, that's really the logic behind analysis of covariance. So, let's then go on to the second part of the assignment, which asks you to take the other file. And again, where did I put it? I've created a subset of the second file, and here RINCOM2, which is an income variable, and let's double check that, has been transformed. And you'll notice that we no longer have categories, which was very clever of the researchers to do that, because it would have been very, very difficult to do our analysis of covariance if our dependent variable was not a continuous or quantitative variable, but a categorical variable. So that's why they transformed that, fortunately for us. And so this is the data set that you're going to use to do the second part of the assignment, which, we're still, now that we've got this continuous variable, we still have to, in a way, look at the distribution of the data to make sure that the data are still normal, that the homogeneity of variance is adhered to, and that now we've introduced this notion, which Lance asked about homogeneity of regression slopes. And I'm trying to figure out how to explain this without getting you guys totally confused, but we'll be learning about regression analysis, and one of the things that you will find out about, in which you, why my computer does this, one of the things, because I'm sure you guys keep seeing that thing pop up, I apologize, but one of the things that you will that you'll find out about is that analysis of variance or analysis of covariance and regression analysis are entirely the same process statistically. They're kind of mirror images of each other. And for right now, you'll just have to take that on faith. But so the reason for looking at the homogeneity of regression slopes is because underlying this this particular statistical analysis is indeed the notion that we have a plottable relationship. So if you will look, I don't know if you have your M&V book in front of you, but on page 102, you have a study which I should probably familiarize myself with that particular study, but it looks like we've got a sex variable, we've got a satisfaction with job variable, and we have a degree variable, and our dependent variable is that income variable that is a continuous variable, and we have three independent variables. I don't know which one of these is the covariate. I should again probably have read this beforehand, but I didn't. Let's see. Effect on job satisfaction on income. Okay, so the degree is the covariate. The degree is the covariate. So if you look on the printout on page 102, we've got a sex times satisfaction with job times degree interaction. And in order to do this in COVA, we have to have this assumption of homogeneity of regression slopes. And when that three-way interaction is not significant, then that says, yes, indeed, that homogeneity of regression slopes is fulfilled, and therefore we can look at the effect of sex by itself, we can look at the effect of satisfaction with the job by itself, and we can also look to see whether the covariate of degree was indeed statistically important in understanding how much money somebody makes. I don't know, I don't want to go much further than that, but that would really be how you could say something about the homogeneity of regression slopes. And if that assumption is not fulfilled, then you're going to have to be very, very careful with how you interpret your findings. I'm trying to think if there's anything else about the assignment that's different from before. So other than the homogeneity of regression slopes, everything else is the same. Homogeneity of variance, you know how to test for that. You know how to test for a line plot of the factors. You know how to read that line plot and say something about whether the factors interact. Or maybe you don't entirely, because let me just say something, and again, I don't know if you have your book, but if you do, and you can look, this is the M&V book, if you look on page 102, we've got a line plot, and we have male and female respondents who are plotted on the level of job satisfaction, very satisfied, not very satisfied in terms of their income. And you will see that the two lines seem to be almost parallel, or maybe they're completely parallel. And so you would probably rightfully conclude that there is no interaction between the sex of the respondent and the amount of satisfaction that he or she has towards a job and the income. Hopefully you all agree with that. But if now, I'm trying to find an example of this where, well, maybe we'll just have to do it based on, okay, that's not a good example, but we had an example in one of the homeworks where the line plot was not an interacting one. I mean, when you've got the line plot and you've got your two lines interacting, then you have an interaction. But in some cases, the line plots didn't interact. But had you extended those, had there been more groups, then they possibly would have interacted. In other words, if you had drawn out the lines all the way to their logical conclusion and kept the straight lines going in the direction they were going in, they would have eventually interacted. So just wanted to mention that as a side thing, because somebody had that in their homework assignment, and I just wanted to let the rest of you know about that. Let's see. So you do your ANCOVA. Is the interaction significant? Oh, I'm sorry, Marilyn. I need to read your comment again because I missed it. And let me just see. Well, okay, so that's an important question. You have to know which are your IVs and which are your DVs. Well, the covariate is always considered an independent variable. It's basically an independent variable that we want to get rid of. That we don't want it to be a factor in our analysis, because then we'll have trouble interpreting the dependent variable. But in terms of analysis of variance, the independent variables are always categories. So, except when we're talking about a covariance, which might not be a categorical variable. So in this particular case, we've got hours worked per week, which I'm assuming, let's look at this, is not a category. So here, this is just how they're going to handle the missing values, the don't know, the not applicable, and they just didn't put anything down. But the expectation, of course, is that the rest of the numbers will always be the number of hours that they actually work. So the covariate is usually, while it's an independent variable, it's usually a continuous variable, because you're looking at how much it correlates with your dependent variable. Your dependent variable is usually a continuous variable also, and your independent variables are usually dichotomous variables, except for the covariate. So when you look at the instructions on how to do this, you know that the covariate is what you're controlling for. So the key words here is, if you have a question like the one that's on page 116 on the assignment, you are interested in evaluating the effect of gender and age on respondents' income while controlling for hours worked. That's your clue that if your other variables, your other independent variables are categorical, that you have a covariate here that you want to control for as part of your analysis of covariance. So hopefully that answers that. Does it, Marilyn? Hopefully. Okay, great. Okay, so going back to the assignment. So what you're going to be asked to do is you run out your ANCOVA, then you need to answer whether your factor interaction is significant, whether your main effects are significant. Hopefully by now you know what an interaction is, you know what a main effect, and if you have more than two groups with either the interaction or with the main effects, you need to do those post hoc. So make sure you do your Bonferronis, and do not try to interpret what it means when you see that, this group has a mean of so-and-so and that group has a mean of something else, until you've done your Bonferronis and you know whether that's a statistically significant difference. The fact that it's an arithmetic difference is not sufficient for you to conclude anything from it. So try to refrain from making commentary about those mean differences until after you've done your Bonferronis. And then, does a covariate significantly influence the dependent variable? And the way that you'd find that out is, again, turning to the example that's on page, I've lost it, hold on just one second, on page 102 here. The way that you'd find out whether the covariate is significant, here the covariate was degree, and just in the same way that you'd see whether the other independent variables were significant, you would look for the significance level here. And indeed, you find that this is a significant covariate, meaning it's an awfully good thing that you put this in as a covariate and statistically removed it from your analysis, because otherwise you might have reached incorrect conclusions about whether sex and job satisfaction affected the level of income. And then now it's asking you to look at the effect size. Now you've had some practice on that. You've looked at those partial eta squares, and most of you have been very good about explaining whether, that the effect size was very small, that the effect size was quite large, that, usually when it's certainly above 0.5, you've got quite a large effect size. So, again, you're being asked to write that. And then finally, you have to write a results statement. Now, it's really important. Several of you have not done this. When you write the results statement, make sure that you put all of the statistical information that you need to per APA style. And I believe that I posted something Ray wrote not too long ago about how to present things in APA style. But basically, for analysis of variance or analysis of covariance, as you go through each of the effects, so if you say, the main effect of gender was significant, then you'd put F, and then parenthesis the degrees of freedom, and there are two of them. It's the degrees of freedom of the variable you're looking at, and then the comma, the error degrees of freedom, in parenthesis, and then you'd put F, whatever the degrees of freedom are, in parenthesis, equals the actual number you got off your printout, comma, P less than whatever the P level was, comma, partial eta squared is whatever it is. That's your effect size. You need to put that, and then you can make your conclusion. So the main effect of sex was significant. You reported all that stuff. Because there are only two groups, then you need to look at the means. Was it the men or the women that had the higher means? Because if the F was significant, it doesn't tell you who got the higher means. You still have to look at the means. So the means, the men made significantly higher incomes, I'm guessing, than the women, and then you can put men's means was blah, 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 women's means was blah, blah, blah. And again, you're reporting all of that. And then you go through the next variable. So the next independent variable was whatever the main effect was or was not significant. You put all that statistical information in paren. You then look if there's a significant main effect. Either you've done some Bonferronis because there's more than two groups, and you can tell from that which groups are different from which other ones. If there's only two groups, you look at the means table. That tells you which one is significantly higher than the other one, and you report that. And then you do the same thing for the interaction. So hopefully that gives you much more of a sense of what we're looking for. And again, don't forget, if you put output, don't just put output in there. I want to know why you're putting that. What are you looking at there? What are you seeing? What are you noticing? If you're looking at outliers, then tell me I'm looking to see if there are any outliers, and based on this, because of whatever, I see that there are a number of outliers. Or I'm looking to see whether the data are normally distributed, and based on this thing, it looks like they're normally distributed. The skewness is whatever. Go through that process, because I don't just want output. I want output. I can just produce output. I want to know your thinking. I want to know that you understand the process you're going through, because when you're doing your dissertation, you're going to need to do this, and you need to understand your data. Okay. End of whatever that is, bandwagon, standing on my bandwagon here, questions.
Michelle, I might have just a quick semantic type question.
Yes, sir.
Like an example on 115, the kind of checklist of going through an ANCOVA.
Yeah.
In kind of the step part, that kind of the screening of the data before, kind of ask you to do all the screening of the data, and if the tests, just like here at the end, if factors and covariates interact, do not conduct ANCOVA.
Right.
But in reality, just in terms of the output, we do have to do the ANCOVA.
Correct.
To do some of the things on top. Okay,
yes,
I just wanted to make
correct.
sure I was thinking.
Yeah,
about
and I, you know what? I haven't actually run this myself yet, so I don't remember whether. I don't know if the covariates are going to interact with the factors.
Got it. Okay, that was all.
They shouldn't. They shouldn't. But that's this test of homogeneity of slopes, which is on here. So if that interaction is significant, then it's you got a problem.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And I also want to say, I- there's a lot of redundancy when you do the Explorer. You're doing the box plots, you're doing the histograms, you're doing the stem and leaf plots, you're doing, all that stuff. Like with the last assignment, I would suggest that you look at the outliers, but you can leave out the stem and leaf plots. And you can, what was the other one that I let you leave out last time? Do not transform the data. That's exactly true. We don't, that's already done for you. Do not transform the data. That's really why, the writers of this book actually provided you with the new data set. They don't want you to spend the time doing that. They really want to make sure that you learn how to do this part of the analysis. And again, I hope you see how this is kind of building on the stuff you've been doing all along. So if you've done that stuff well all along, then just keep doing what you're doing. Just add the new piece about the covariate. If you've been having trouble with that and you've done a redo and you've done better on the redo, then again, keep doing what you're doing. If you've had comments, then look at the comments and see what they're telling you. If I'm saying to you, hey, give me a real hypothesis in which you talk about how you think that independent variable is going to act on the dependent variable, then try to do that for this assignment, because otherwise you're going to get points off yet again on the same thing you've been doing. So you should at this point have a pretty good sense of what areas you're having problems with. And if you're having problems, Robin has office hours on Sunday. You can email her and ask for some help if there's something that you keep doing the same. Every piece of homework you've gotten, you're getting the same feedback, and you don't understand it, and you don't know why you're doing it. You don't know how to not do it. Please go to her office hours, or please email her. Get some help. Don't keep making the same mistake over and over again, because you're going to get the same result. Other questions? Okay, so one of the things you need to do is you do need to make predictions before you run your data. And I understand that your predictions may not be correct, but that's how you do research. It's sort of not kosher to do your research and find out what you find out and go, oh, well, then the prediction should have been X and so. It's really okay to predict that, in this particular example here, that men are going to make significantly less money than women. Because if that's what you believe, now ideally you will have read the literature. The literature should pretty much support the fact that men make more money than women. So ideally you should have a prediction that men are going to make significantly more money in this study than will women. But nobody expects, your predictions don't have to be right, but you do need to make the predictions. And then when you find what you find, you can say, my prediction that men would make significantly more money than women was not supported by the data. In fact, women made significantly, men, I can't remember, the opposite of whatever I just said. I hope that makes sense to you. Questions? I'll give you all another second to think of a question, and then if I don't hear any, then I'm going to move on. I will be having office hours again on Monday, if you can come to them. We'll be primarily focusing on the next assignment, which is coming also around the pike. That too should be fairly simple, especially if you do well in this one, because it's going to be another ANCOVA, and it's using the same data set that you used for assignment 4. So if you did well in assignment 4, then assignment 6 should be, and do well in 5, assignment 6 should be really easy. I don't know that I will have had a chance yet to grade any assignments from assignment 5, so I won't be able to respond specifically to yours, but I can sort of answer general things about that assignment if there are questions. but the focus will be primarily on assignment 6. And I'm going to be calling you from out of town, so hopefully I will have no nasty surprises with the internet. And if I do, I may have to move the office hours by a day or two, and I will certainly inform you of that. But my plan is not to have problems and be able to have my office hours as planned. And if necessary, I'll go to a Starbucks or something to get contact with the internet. Any other questions? By the way, I did a quick little thing with, with most of your scores to date, and some people are, they're right around the 80% mark or just barely above it, so you got to keep pushing here. But most of you are doing okay. Some of you are doing way better than that, but, and there are a couple of you that are doing less well than that, but, you can figure this out. You can sit down and count how many points you have and divide it by the total number of points and know exactly where you stand. So I will talk to whoever's on the line on Monday, assuming no problems with internet, and I hope you guys have a good weekend. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.